All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Today's session is called Landscape of MicroProfile and Jakarta EE Tools. We're very excited to be back at J4K to give you an updated presentation on the tools that are available. So let's just go ahead and get started. Starting with some introductions. So my name is K.Kodama. I'm a developer at IBM under IBM Cloud and Cognitive, specifically on the Open Liberty developer experience team, where we create tooling around Liberty and Jakarta EE and MicroProfile. And I'll let Y.K. introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here again. And I'm Y.K. And like Catherine, I'm a developer and architect from IBM. And we work on different open source projects for around Java, right? From Open Liberty to MicroProfile and Jakarta EE and the toolings that are associated with it. So it's great to be here to talk to you all.
All right, great. So like we said, we're from Open Liberty.
And if you want to check out Open Liberty, just go to openliberty.io and you'll find out more there.
So today's presentation, like we said, will be landscape of tools around MicroProfile and Jakarta EE, and this is our October 2021 edition. I'll give a quick overview of our agenda for today's session, and then I'll hand it over to Y.K. So first, we'll do a brief introduction on what MicroProfile is and Jakarta EE is, if you aren't familiar with any of those technologies, and sort of the status of them now. And then we'll get into some details around the different tools that are available for developers to make the developer experience better. Then I'll end with a demo and we'll look at some summary charts.
All right, thanks, Catherine, and let's get going here. So let's take a quick look at MicroProfile, what it is and where things are, right? And how it's being used, and then we'll go from there. So MicroProfile is an effort, it's an open community effort to optimize Java for microservices architecture, right? So it started as a community collaboration and effort, and it's now a working group under Eclipse Foundation. And there's the link here to find out more. You can find out more, and it basically provides us a set of APIs for us to an open set of APIs for building cloud-native applications with obviously Kubernetes in mind, and then the microservices as the architecture, right? So it consists of various APIs that you can use. Some of it are familiar to everyone, we presume, like what you would need to build RESTful services. And then others are net new APIs that the MicroProfile community has introduced, like, to deal with different aspects as we work in the cloud native environments. For instance, externalizing your configuration with MicroProfile config, or dealing with open APIs, or even as we integrate in a Kubernetes or cloud native environments, we need to deal with things like health checks and metrics and so on. So these APIs under MicroProfile helps facilitate how you would build an application for such a cloud native environment easily, right? So, and as mentioned, it's an open set of APIs, right? Various frameworks or runtimes supports it, have declared or tested to be compatible with the different versions of MicroProfile APIs. We have a list here, right? From Wildfly, Cumulux, Open Liberty, OSU Liberty, Thorntail, Pyar, JBoss, Quarkus, Haldon, and Tommy, right? So they and you can find out more on the link that we have here, right? So they are compatible with the MicroProfile APIs, the different version of it, the latest being 4.x. So then you have flexibility to build your applications with these APIs, right? To achieve the kind of cloud native characteristics that you need. At the same time, you have choices with the different frameworks or runtimes that you want to use to build your application. Now that was MicroProfile. Let's take a quick look at Jakarta EE before we dive into what would be most interesting to developers from a developer experience and tooling standpoint. So Jakarta EE is the evolution of the new Java EE, right? So it's also another working group under Eclipse Foundation, looking at how we evolve enterprise Java openly for cloud native world, right? So we're all familiar with Java EE, and similarly, Jakarta EE bring forward this set of APIs that we are familiar with and move them forward for what community is one thing in enterprise cloud native Java. Java, right? So for instance, a web profile to build web services applications, and then you have your being validation APIs, your concurrency APIs, batch APIs for different purposes, and then there's new API set being considered like for configuration, drawing from experience from MicroProfile and things like that, right? So this is the evolution of Java EE under in an open manner under Eclipse Foundation as Jakarta EE, and there has been a few releases of that, right? Again, it's an open sort of open standard, right? So different runtimes have declared compatibility with it. This is a view of what's there for Jakarta EE 9.1, which is the latest version of Jakarta EE from a spec standpoint, right? So you can see different frameworks and runtimes from all over the world, if you will, supports it, right? Another view of what's the version 9. Version 9 here, the key thing here for version 9 is to move from a JavaX namespace to Jakarta namespace, right? So these frameworks, along with what's there on the previous page, they support Jakarta EE 9 and 9.1. This is going back to Jakarta EE 8 now as the first version that's done under Eclipse Foundation as within the Jakarta EE work group, right? As you can see, a healthy spectrum of servers and runtimes and frameworks supported, right? So that's Jakarta EE. As you know, with any applications, right, we have developers that want to build applications using certain APIs, and then the APIs and the applications that you wrote using those APIs will run on the frameworks and runtimes that we discussed earlier. But from a developer lifecycle standpoint, right, so we are looking at what's a typical workflow. So you start with creating a new project. You'll be working with your code, right? Whether it's adding a new class or editing different lines of code, and then you would build, and then you will package them up and deploy them potentially, or just simply run them, right, within your framework or runtime, right? And then you would test, and then you write tests potentially, or if you do test-driven development, right, tests may be done upfront, and you repeat the cycle, right? As you can see, it's an iterative process that we are familiar with, and we want to be able to do them as easily and as efficiently or as enjoyable as possible, right? So it'll be nice, and as we know, there are different tools that help with these aspects of a development lifecycle, right? Like coding assistant or editors or IDEs that we can use, and that's what we'll try to look at today and see what's there for MicroProfile and Jakarta EE developers. So to help us with thinking about the different tools that we have, we came up with a sort of a simple model, right? This is nothing fancy. We are all familiar with it, right? So iterative development cycle looks like this. You start with, say, creating something, and then you'll be building it, you'll be editing, and then you'll be testing, right? So we just use this simple mental model to talk about the different tools that we have out there for working with MicroProfile and Jakarta EE. So besides the cycle, and then obviously we, as developers, we will have our favorite editor or IDE that we want to work with, right? So these things don't work in a vacuum. So we will work with a certain IDE and editor in mind. So that would be the other aspect that we'll take a look at and see what's out there as well, as of October 2021. All right, so we will start off by looking at what we have to help us create a new project, right? Get going here. So there are starters out there that would help us with creating a Java application to work that want to use a MicroProfile or Jakarta EE APIs. For instance, there's the community effort around MicroProfile Starter. So that's associated with directly with the MicroProfile working group, right? So go to start.microprofile.io, right? And then you fill in some choices there. For instance, the versions of APIs that you want to use, your Java SE versions, then it will give you a package, a zip that you can then unzip and work with locally. It gives you sort of a template to start building an application, right? And at the same time, with MicroProfile Starter, there's also VS Code, Visual Studio Code extension, and IntelliJ plugin available for you to work with to get started easily with building an application that uses MicroProfile. Similarly, we have start.jakarta.ee, right? There's a template there that we can use to get going with Jakarta EE applications. At the same time, also besides what we have available through the community from MicroProfile and Jakarta. There's also runtime specific starters or generators, right? Different frameworks and runtimes have done their own that's meant to help developers get going with building these applications using the MicroProfile and Jakarta EE APIs versus using the runtime, right? For instance, there's a Quarkus starter, there's an OpenLiberty starter, there's also Pyra has some facilities within editors and IDE tools that they have that support to make it easier for us to get going with building the applications. So that's the first step. And then as we move on, right, you will be building our applications once we have some code, right? So as you can imagine, and as we all know, Maven and Gradle are the popular build tools these days for Java applications, right? So, and to make it easier for us to work with the different runtimes and frameworks that we've chosen, and they actually provide plugins integrating with Maven and Gradle for us to make it easier for us to manage the lifecycle as we code our application and have it running with the framework and all runtime that we've chosen, right? So these things would these will be the build plugins from the different runtimes and so on. So that makes it easier for us to manage our build lifecycle and integrate it as part of our DevOps toolchain, right? So, and then on top of that, some of the things and interesting things that folks have done is actually offering and optimized capabilities to help with iterative development, right? To take away the need to manually repackage, rebuild, repackage, and then redeploy your stuff, and then simplifying that, or just optimizing that so that developers, you don't have to manually go and issue a manual compile command or just rebuild and redeploy, but with Assistant provided, you can just go into a very fast in the loop development or iterative cycle where you just make your changes, save that, and then the rest will be handled for you by the facilities provided by the different runtimes, right? So Liberty has what we call dev mode, Quarkus does that, and then also Pyra has some facilities around that. And also there's third-party tools like Watch and Deploy that seem to take away the mundane tasks, and so developers can focus easily in making code changes. So you don't have to worry about repeatedly doing these things manually, like rebuilding and so on, but you can just focus on making your code changes, and the rest will be taken care of for you, right? And we'll take a look at that live actually in a bit. So that's an optimization on top of just a typical build plugins helping you with managing the lifecycle of building the applications. Let's get into editing, right? So this is editor integration helping us with coding, right? So there are different spectrum of choices of editors out there, from Eclipse to IntelliJ to VS Code to NetBeans and so on, and different runtimes have different integration with these editors. So you're free to choose the one that you prefer. Many people may like to use IntelliJ. Visual Studio Code is getting popular, right? Eclipse is always there. So you can choose what you like to work with and use them to build your MicroProfile or Jakarta EE applications. And there are coding assistants available. So specifically for MicroProfile and Jakarta EE, there's efforts underway under the Eclipse Foundation to build language servers for the APIs, right? So the idea of a language server is to come up with a common implementation to handle the different aspects of the APIs to provide assistance to developers, like for instance, quick fixes, checking validations, or even auto completion and so on, so that as you code with the APIs, then you don't have to code as much, and then there will be assistance to help you code faster, right? So there's the LSP for MicroProfile efforts to look at building a language server for MicroProfile APIs. Similarly, we have also a project going on for Jakarta EE, right? Again, that's an Eclipse Foundation efforts, right, to provide a language server for Jakarta EE API. So these language servers are meant to give us the coding assistance that we need as we work in the different editors for working with these APIs. Well, what about making us life easier for developers to perhaps generate some more code for us. For instance, as we work with REST API, right? It would be nice if certain boilerplate code or stubs can be automatically generated for us, right? Yes, there are tooling out there for that. For instance, the MicroProfile REST client generation from open API tools, right? As well as for even server-side stubs, it's there in open API tools. And let's move on to testing. So one aspect besides, so we go from creating a project to building to editing, and then now let's take a look at testing, right? We have to, it's a complete cycle. And yes, the usual suspects are there with testing, automated testing, right? We know about JUnit, with Quillian. What else when it comes to MicroProfile and Jakarta EE? So some runtimes and frameworks have their own additional facilities provided, for instance, Quarkus tests and Tommy's application composer to help you with testing your applications running with their frameworks. There are also new technologies. Well, it's not exactly very new now because containers been around for a few years by now, but there are technologies leveraging containers to make life easier for us to test, especially to get true to production testing, right? So as you can imagine, if you can have running containers that's like what you will use in production, then you would actually be testing in production line environment much earlier in the cycle, and then that makes testing give us better quality and also make life easier for us when it comes to testing too, right? Setting up different dependency and so on. So these would be the test containers and microshed testing technology, looking at using containers and also specifically for Jakarta, potentially Jakarta EE and MicroProfile APIs. Last but not least, besides the tooling that we've discussed before, I mean, as developers who will need help, resources to help us get going, or reference materials and things like that, right? So there are also materials and assets out there for that, and then community efforts. For instance, there's the extensions for MicroProfile project, right? It gives us different samples or common, for instance, common config source for different things like the database and so on that would help us in help developers in doing our job, right? So we can look at those samples or even just reuse them because it's open source where appropriate. And also there's the Eclipse Cargo Tracker as a sample, pretty much a complete reference, or it's not, I shouldn't say reference, just to be accurate, a sample on Jakarta EE application. And also with Liberty, there's a set of guides around MicroProfile and Jakarta EE technologies to help developers get going with building cognitive Java applications using these APIs. And I think we know that there's the latest enhancements is actually Liberty is providing cloud-hosted learning environments for developers to work with and learn these APIs, right? So yeah, so that's a quick whirlwind tour of what's out there. We'll be summarizing these things at the end, but before we do that, let's see these things in action. So I will hand it over to Catherine to show us the exciting stuff.
Great, thanks, Y.K. Yeah, so today I'll try and show some of those tools in action. In about 10 minutes, we'll aim for, and I want to start from the beginning of that lifecycle Y.K. was talking about, so from project creation to building, editing, and testing. So then what tools can help us create a project? Here I am in VS Code, but like Y.K. said, a lot of these tools exist in IntelliJ as well. So these are the VS Code MicroProfile extensions I have installed right now. I just want to point out there's an extension pack for MicroProfile that bundles quite a few, and then there are some runtime specific tools like Open Liberty tools, Payara tools, and Quarkus. So for today, I want to create two microservices, one with Open Liberty, one with Payara, and connect them as a REST client, REST service setup here. So here I've already generated this application, but basically you just go to Open Liberty IO and you can create a starter application, and it will give you a zip project that you can just import into your IDE or editor. So I've already gone ahead and done that, but I wanted to point out, you can specify the group ID, the artifact ID, what Java EE version you want to use, and what MicroProfile version. So we're using the latest 4.1. Right, so back in VS Code, I have this REST service project here. And you'll notice I have this Liberty Dev dashboard view as well. This will pick up my Open Liberty projects and let me start them in dev mode. So if I right click and hit start, it opens up the terminal in VS Code and will actually start up my application. So here we can see we're running in dev mode. It tells us what ports we can use, what port I can use to debug, and that our application is up and running. So taking a look at this application, it was pretty basic. We have this REST application class and then this hello class. So I will go to this endpoint first. 9080 is the default port for Open Liberty, and it's our REST service. And I believe it is API hello. Right. And so like we said, dev mode can pick up changes and redeploy them for you, so you don't have to worry about that rerunning. So here, if I just edit this file, you'll see in the terminal, we have like a source compilation that happened. And if I refresh at my endpoint, we see those changes in effect. So basically we can start dev mode and kind of forget about it and have our changes picked up. So let's look at what else I've added to this application here. It's just a very simple cafe service application. So I have a drink class here. A drink has a name and a cost. And then I have my service here at the cafe endpoint, and I've just populated it with a few drinks. So let's say now I want to add something like MicroProfile health. So I would go into my server XML for Liberty and I can add in the MP health feature, and dev mode will install that feature for me. And then we can actually see what that looks like at the health endpoint. So MP health, helps you define what you think or what you define is healthy for your microservice or your application. So we don't have any health checks right now because we've only enabled the application here. So let's go ahead and create, let's say I want to make a cafe readiness check. And then this is where something like tools from MicroProfile can come in handy, where I can use snippets for something that I'll be typing a lot. Say, health checks are pretty standard. So I can type MP readiness. This is a MicroProfile health readiness check. And that snippet populates my whole class here. And you can see I have this whole health check kind of already implemented the base of it. And we can check our endpoint again, and it's actually up and running. So MicroProfile tools gives you a good way to get started, popular snippets and template code. All right, so given that, one other thing I wanted to mention is we also have OpenAPI, MicroProfile OpenAPI installed here. So I can see our OpenAPI endpoint, and this will show us what paths are available, the components, my drink schema, and we'll be using that to connect to our REST client application. So like I said, we want to have two applications sort of connected to each other, one with Open Liberty and one with Payara for the purposes of the demo. So next, I would want to go ahead and create my second application. And I can do this with the Payara, the MicroProfile starter or the Payara starter. There's options for both. And if I do this from within VS Code, you can see it just prompts you for the group ID, the artifact ID, the MicroProfile version, and then it shows which servers support that version. You can pick your Java version, your build tool, and then even you can pick the specs that you want to see. So in the interest of time, I've already gone ahead and generated that project. And so I have this REST client project here. And you'll see I also have this Payara view in my VS Code instance here. And this is coming from the Payara tools extension. So I can hit sort of run on that, and it will actually start up my Payara application for us. And while it does that, let's take a quick look at what this base application that was generated does. So again, we have just some basic classes here. We have a hello endpoint we can test right away. And looks like our application started. So this is sort of the generated homepage, and we can see the different endpoints. Similar to Open Liberty, so you can make changes and code. There's just one extra step. So I would, once I've saved my changes, I'll go into the Payara dashboard here and hit the refresh, and it'll redeploy my application for me. And then we can see it's done. If I refresh that endpoint, we can see our changes have taken effect. All right, so now let's go ahead and connect the two applications. So to do that, I want to generate a MicroProfile REST client, and I can use the MicroProfile REST client generator extension to do that. So I know it's small, but here I click generate a MicroProfile REST client, and I can do this from an OpenAPI file or a URL. So I'm going to select URL and go ahead and enter the URL from our REST service application. It'll confirm where it's generating into, the package name, and we can see it says successfully generated. And you'll see here now in my REST service, I have two new folders. So I have API and I have models. So let's take a look at models really quickly. This is just a drink model. It generated from our OpenAPI endpoint, very similar to what I had in REST service. And then we have some API exception classes, and then this default API class here. That was all auto-generated for us. So I'm just going to go ahead and resolve some of these imports. But we can see it has our cafe endpoint, the hello endpoint. So we'll use this cafe endpoint here. And I'm just going to go ahead and enter the base URI as well. And it'll be that just to connect the two there. And you'll see we also have some covers here. This is coming from MicroProfile, tools for MicroProfile as well. So now that we have our REST client, we can create a controller class for that. So I'll just call it cafe controller. All right. And in the interest of time, oops, I'm going to just copy and paste this class over here. Okay, so I have this cafe controller class that got a whole bunch of imports here. But what I wanted to show is that we're injecting our REST client, our cafe service, from our default API class that was generated for us. And then we can see we have our get menu method here that's calling our cafe service application. So we can actually go ahead and test that out. So if I go to 8080, data, just get menu. Not, I can actually check the open API. Oh, you know why? Because I didn't redeploy here. So just redeploying with Pyera, using the Pyera tool here. All right, so we can check it again. We see our menu populated here for us. And something cool about tools for MicroProfile too, there are diagnostics. So let's say I made a mistake here and I forgot to add REST client. We do get warnings directly in the IDE and quick fixes associated. That'll help you, code with the API. So you don't need to know the details of every single one. All right, and then I know we're running out of time here, but quickly I'll stop this application and switch back over to our Open Liberty application. So our Open Liberty application is still running here. I just want to show quickly what it looks like when I make a test with microshed containers. So to do this, I'm just going to add a microshed test here, and then I'll specify a container. So this is just an application container, similar to how it's using test containers. It tells us our context root and how to know when our application is ready. And then we will use the REST client annotation here, the one from containers, and add in a quick test. So this is just testing the size of our inventory. Now with dev mode, we can hit enter in the terminal, or you can right click and run tests through that, and that will run your tests for you. You can also enable dev mode to run tests on every code file change. All right, so that was a really quick overview of the different tools available in VS Code. Those were just a few that we touched on today, but as we showed before, there's many more. All right, so let's take a look at some of these summary charts to kind of sum up what we've looked at today. So in terms of developer tools, for starters, for MicroProfile, we have the MicroProfile starter and the different IDE plugins. For Jakarta EE, we have the Jakarta EE starter, and then we have a number of runtime starters. So the Open Liberty starter, Pyera, Quarkus, etc. For build and run, we have the Maven Gradle build plugins. So things like Open Liberty Dev Mode, And then for IDE integration, we have Eclipse LSP for MP. So that was the tools for MicroProfile extension we just saw in VS Code, giving us the snippets and the diagnostics. And then the incubator project LSP for Jakarta that we are working on developing as well, starting with Eclipse. And then for code generators, we have open API tools, and we saw that integrated into VS Code with the MicroProfile REST client generator. And then for automated testing, I know it's quick, but I showed a bit of microshed testing, but there are also JUnit Aquarium test containers. IDE and editor integration, here's just a quick view of what's there for the popular runtimes. So Apache Tommy support, Peloton support, Open Liberty support, Payera and Quarkus as well. So you can see they all have their own sort of extensions enabled for each different IDE. And then also Open Liberty and Quarkus have dev mode that works in any editor. All right, so these are exciting times for open cloud native Java. The community is vibrant, very active, and there are more MicroProfile and Jakarta EE tools than ever before, with even more to come. So hopefully we showed you something new today that you can try out. And if you have any suggestions for us, anything you'd like to see, or a tool we might not have talked about today, definitely reach out. We'd love to hear your feedback. And we're both available at Twitter. Our Twitter handles are there, and we'd love to hear from you.
All right, thanks. So I think we have a few questions here. So maybe we will start off with something that's that mentioned MicroProfile and Jakarta EE directly first. So there's a question around MicroProfile leverages some Jakarta EE APIs. How do you see these two specifications evolving? Do you see any convergence of these two in the future? So the community that's involved in both MicroProfile and Jakarta EE, they work together closely, right? So it's a very friendly and open and collaborative community. And MicroProfile was started and still is the place for innovating in cloud native Java APIs, right? So looking at what's the leading edge, if not the bleeding edge, and then what's next that we should be considered, and then be perhaps experimenting and so on and so forth. And then it does reuse a core set of APIs from Jakarta EE, so we can expect that the community will continue to collaborate. The both working groups will continue to collaborate and to define what makes sense, and some of the successes that MicroProfile has achieved may make their way over to Jakarta EE, right? So there is efforts looking at how things should be, and through a cloud native for Java efforts under Eclipse Foundation at that. So that's how we see things. Jakarta EE will expect that they'll move faster to evolve things as to provide a broad, I guess the core. It's not even core, the whole package for enterprises working with cloud native Java. At the same time, we can see, I would expect that MicroProfile will continue to innovate and working closely with Jakarta EE. And Catherine, feel free to chime in as you see fit, because I know we are running short of time. We'll try to get through all these questions. If not, then we'll try to respond to them in the chats, right? So is there a benchmark available for the different MicroProfile runtimes? I'm assuming this is a question around performance or trying to measure things. There's not one specific benchmark that's meant for MicroProfile, but there is microservices benchmarks and out there, right? And in fact, offhand, I guess I can point to some work that we've done in OpenLibD running with such cloud native, benchmark to measure microservices performance, right? So yeah, so that may be an option there. So that's something to consider. And if we interested in more, we can certainly chat more offline. So then let's move on to some tooling questions. So what's your take on GitHub Actions, Gitpod, VS Code, and Code Ready for Java? And as well as, I guess another related question is around cloud-focused tools, what you would recommend for CI/CD, build ID, and observability. Those are very loaded questions. There's a lot of things out there. I think we have, as we were trying to show, there's a healthy set of tools out there that we can work with and choose from. I think you can go with what you like. For one, obviously, every developer may have their own preferences when it comes to an IDE, but I would expect that I can see that things are evolving to be perhaps more cloud-oriented for sure, or even cloud-based, right? For instance, with Eclipse AI and so on. So that can be that can be a trend, right? And the same time, I think I would see personally, I'll let Catherine chime in and have the last words, that things will become, there will be better tooling for Kubernetes integration and with the whole pipeline and tool chain in mind, right? So for Kubernetes. So Catherine?
Yeah, no, everything you said was good. I know we're coming up on the end. So thank you everyone again for answering, and we'll be online to answer any other questions.
Thanks everyone.